In principle, this would be great news. However, such developments are greatly impacting efforts to maintain space safe, secure, and sustainable. Without taking steps to heighten the level of commitment to behave responsibly, we will soon run into a problem. The growing density of the orbital environment is already of major concern. Research shows that it adds to the existing sustainability challenges and could lead to increased collision risks down the road. Without an immediate and substantive response to these new realities, the space industry and indeed the modern society could face serious problems. We are becoming increasingly reliant on space assets, and losing the benefits they offer, even for a limited time, could be disastrous for the global economy. Large constellations also pose problems for ground-based astronomical observations. In the absence of significant mitigation efforts, astronomical surveys will be severely affected. Empirical validation has already confirmed that these concerns are not purely theoretical, and we are only at the beginning of this new era in space operations. Well, these issues are recognized and deliberated on at the top political level. Member states and observers of the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space are seeking solutions to these challenges. And the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs is carefully following all developments in the sector as we strive to ensure that all space stakeholders uphold the highest standards of responsibility and transparency in the unique environment that is the province of all humankind. Ladies and gentlemen, it is no exaggeration to say that we are approaching the golden age for space exploration and use. New missions, exciting concepts, lowering barriers to accessing space, all are promising great progress for the industry and for humanity as such. But in everything we do, we must put sustainability at the forefront. Maintaining orbital density with reasonable limits requires action on behalf of stakeholders. In an environment that belongs to all of us and where an action of one actor clearly influences everyone else, there is no place for unilateralism. We must work together so that success today does not impede progress tomorrow. And if we do so, I'm convinced it will translate into a better future for humanity. That is ultimately what we all aim for. I wish you a successful and productive event, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much to the director for this encouraging message and an insightful remark. Ladies and gentlemen, my sincere apology as co-organizer of the event for these technical glitches. We understand that this platform, Zoom platform, has been served as a single platform for all the meeting of the emerging technologies for connectivity. So maybe it's a time to, maybe the platform also understand that today is Friday. Thank you so much for your understanding and patience. Now, it is time to start our real discussions. And then before starting our panel discussion, I would like to welcome and distinguish the speaker, Mr. Dimitri Bush from the Euro Consultant for his keynote presentations. Mr. Dimitri Bush, please. And
yes, thank you.
Have a presentation to share.
Yes, I'm going to share my screen. Let me know if you see it.
Yes, we can see it, but maybe make it larger as a screen presentation mode.
Sure, I'll do that. Okay. Is it better now?
Yes.
Okay.
Please.
So, all right. So thank you for the introduction. So I am Dimitri Bush, so senior consultant at Euroconsult, and I'm very happy to be here today to present you a market overview on SATCOM for universal broadband access. So before I start with the market overview, I would like to take a few moments to present Euroconsult so briefly. So the Euroconsult Group is a leading global strategy consulting and market intelligence firm specialized in the space sector and satellite-enabled verticals. As you can see here, we have 8 global locations with our headquarters in Paris, France. And so we accompany private companies and governments around the world in strategic decision-making, providing end-to-end consulting services from strategy definition to implementation. We have over 30 years of experience in consulting, developing comprehensive market intelligence programs, organizing executive level annual summits and training programs as well in the satellite industry. And I would like to highlight on the market intelligence side of business that we released the first edition of our report on the universal broadband access market earlier this year, a topic that will be at the center of my presentation today. So to begin with the presentation, I would say before looking at some of the key trends and numbers, I think it's important to give a bit of a background on what universal broadband access is and why it is so important today for satellites. So access to broadband services is increasingly recognized as a driver of economic growth. For example, public services such as remote health or telelearning are improved with the availability of communication networks. And so due to the benefits associated with broadband services, international organizations are encouraging infrastructure development plans and government promotion of broadband use in remote and as well unserved areas. I would say significant progress has been made globally in recent years in expanding access to and as well adoption of broadband services, as highlighted by the strong growth in total individuals using the internet, which I think has close to double in the 2010s. But I would say despite this positive trend, digital inequities still exist and have in some cases even been accentuated since the start of COVID-19, so a bit less than 1.5 years ago, as many people around the world have been forced to shift towards, let's say, work from home and remote learning due to stay-at-home orders imposed by governments. So I think it's important to look at both the addressable market for satellite and the satellite market itself to better understand the current situation. So you can see here with the chart on the left our reasoning and the overall addressable market for satellite. So of the close to 7.8 billion world population today, 46% remains unconnected, which is still a lot, with most of this population concentrated in developing regions. Overall, the higher the level of human development of a country and the greater the access to internet. So the dichotomy between advanced and emerging markets is significant. I can give you an example. As for example, just over 10% of people in advanced markets are unconnected, while this number is significantly higher at more than 55% in emerging markets that remain unconnected. There is also a strong dichotomy between urban and rural areas. The low return on investment in network deployment in sparsely populated areas implies that in many emerging countries, connectivity is largely limited to urban areas, and this often leaves, unfortunately, rural areas totally cut off. In these geographic areas, satellite is the primary technology for filling the gap, as it provides an alternative solution where extending terrestrial networks would be uneconomical and not feasible in many cases. Looking at the second layer, so the population addressable by satellite, so around 700 million today. So this, just to explain, includes the population that could be addressed by satellite and the underconnected population, meaning people that are connected to a broadband service but have insufficient data rates or are accessing a service that is too expensive. And so, as mentioned before, so we estimate this market at around 700 million people today, but it is expected to grow by the end of the 2020s. So reasons for that include new satellite technology and next generation satellites. For example, very high throughput satellites, so VHTS satellites, like Viasat-3, for example, and NGSO constellations. NGSO meaning non-geostationary satellite constellations. And for example, a good example is SpaceX's Starlink. So these will lead to improved economics enabled by lower capacity pricing that are expected to drive higher data rate requirements in coming years. In addition, those constellations are expected to unlock new growth opportunities for latency sensitive applications, such as, for example, cellular backhaul. And this will make satellite solutions more attractive and competitive compared to terrestrial solutions in coming years. Overall, I would say that the negative impact of growing terrestrial deployment should be counterbalanced by improved services that should lead satellite services to increasingly target first underconnected areas, but as well, so rural areas as well. And so if you look at the bottom of the chart, so the 43 million, so this is the total number of satellite broadband users today. So if you calculate the total, this represents a very small share, so around 6% of the total population addressable by satellite. So it's still very low, this percentage. But the good news is that we expect the total number of users to be multiplied by 3 by the end of the 2020s. So I would say that overall, these numbers show that there is still a lot of work to do to be in a position to bridge the digital divide. But overall, I believe that satellite has a central role to play in the post-COVID world in coming years, as many geographic areas around the world remain unconnected or underconnected and will remain so in coming years. In most cases, we will have limited or no access to terrestrial services. So moving to the next slide, maybe a quick introduction on SATCOM solutions today for the universal broadband access market. So important to highlight is the fact that there are currently 3 solutions used to address this market. So community Wi-Fi hotspots, consumer broadband, and cellular backhaul. So with 3G, 4G, and 5G. What's important to note today is that consumer broadband is the dominant satellite option in advanced economies, while Wi-Fi hotspots are the most used option in emerging markets. And this is mainly due to the lower cost of services and the ability to share costs among, let's say, a larger number of users. And as well, I would say that both SATCOM revenues and capacity usage are expected to observe strong growth in coming years. So moving to the next slide. So here in the next few slides, I will highlight what has changed recently in the SATCOM, in terms of SATCOM technology and economics, and that will make universal broadband services more susceptible to develop strongly in coming years. So first, I think it's interesting to focus on the new space industry. So the space industry has changed a lot in recent years with the development of this new space industry. So you can see here on this slide the differences between traditional and new space, such as, for example, the cost model with new space having more of a, let's say, a low cost model or approach. New space is also software driven, application oriented as well, and the industry overall is much less risk averse than traditional space. Drivers and enablers for new space include new technologies in upstream and downstream. So I can give examples like AI, for example, or cloud computing, quantum computing. And as well, what's important to note is that increasing private investments, so for example, seed funding or venture capital, crowdfunding, as well as new and increasing trends in demand, like connectivity, intelligence, mobility, all of this is important for this industry. And so when looking in further details at private funding, I think that a very important event for new space was the launch of SpaceX's first commercial payload. So I think it was in 2009. And this really marked a turning point in the new space age. So moving to the next slide. So here I'm going to get a focus on the second market, so which is currently facing structural drivers of market pull and technology push. So in recent years, the space sector has been pushing for a substantially more cost-effective satellite and as well ground infrastructure. So these technology investments are geared to meet rapidly evolving market requirements within an increasingly competitive environment. Satellite operators have started to embrace the driving requirements for broadband connectivity. However, what's happening is that they're meeting higher expectations in terms of user experience and as well costs. So in order to better serve these user requirements, satellite operators are adopting new business models, including, for example, co-investment or revenue share. What else? For example, managed services as well. And I would say that the data market is really what's driving the market. So it's providing the satellite industry with significant growth opportunities due to the growing requirements for broadband connectivity, I would say anywhere, anytime. And this is opening new markets for the industry and pushing operators to reposition their investments towards new growth segments. And so universal broadband being one of the key ones today. In recent years as well, the space sector has been pushing for substantially more effective satellite infrastructure and ground segment at a lower cost. So HTS, which is high throughput satellites, systems have been introduced significantly have introduced more satellite capacity in recent years, and as well at a reduced cost per bit. And this trend is expected to intensify, I would say, in coming years and over the next decade with the growing availability of HTS supply coupled as well with an increasing push for standardization in satellite manufacturing. So here you can have a look at HTS and the history, recent history of what has happened. So I mentioned earlier HTS as one of the key drivers for SATCOM in recent years. So you can see here, since the introduction of the first HTS satellites that I refer here as GeoHTS 1.0, which is for first generation of satellites. So a lot has happened since then, right? It was in the mid 2000s. And so since then, several new generations of HTS satellites have been launched or are planned to be launched in coming years, leading to a multi-layered environment. So as you can see here, with each new generation of satellites is associated an increase in capacity provided per satellite. So we started at less than 10 Gbps per satellite with the first generation, and we're today at hundreds of Gbps for the latest generation of satellites. And when you look at NGSO constellations, they will even provide capacity in the TBPS, at the TBPS level. So apart from bringing more capacity, I think these new generations of HTS satellites are also bringing more flexibility to the table. And with some new generation satellites offering even full flexibility, when the first generation of HTS satellite offered basically no flexibility. And what has this led to? So if we focus on the cost base of capacity, which is actually the total space segment, CapEx, so capital expenditure, divided by GBPS. So it has fallen significantly over the past 20 years since the introduction of the first HTS satellites. So it's due in part to these new HTS satellites. And this is essential for the broadband market to develop further. We need prices to decrease even further, and that's how you can really develop this satellite broadband market in coming years. And as you can see here, the cost base of capacity has been divided by 10 between the first generation of satellites and the latest generation. Manufacturers of satellites have generally been able to offer higher volumes of capacity per satellite over time with asymmetrically lower increases in cost to operators, effectively translating into a structural driver of downward pressure on capacity pricing. So the value proposition of those next generation HTS satellites has improved, as I mentioned earlier. However, continued progress really needs to happen in the cost base and pricing levels of HTS to continue supporting the narrowing of the gap between satellite services and legacy terrestrial networks. Further drops in the cost base of capacity and associated end user pricing levels are expected with the entry of, as I said before, VHTS and NGSO constellations. And the improved economics enabled by this lower capacity pricing is expected to unlock new opportunities for broadband in rural and remote areas, but also increasingly for satellite in underconnected areas closer to cities and urban areas. To give you an example, HTS systems, for example, are a condition for the use of satellites to support 5G network deployments in coming years. So a quick focus on capacity ARPUs, which is pricing. So looking forward, capacity prices can be expected to experience a strong decrease in prices. This has happened already in the past 5-10 years and should continue. So in line with the influx of new lower cost capacity, all geographies, I would say, and all market segments should be concerned. And this will be, again, key for the development of the satellite universal broadband access market, as it's a market that is really, I would say, relatively high, that has high price sensitivity. So moving to the next slide, I think it's important to focus on this slide on NGSO constellations, as they will be a key element if satellite is to one day help bridge the digital divide. So the current state of play of NGSO satellite is presented here. So I highlight here 5 of the most advanced projects, but there are others as well that are less advanced. But so if you look at the most advanced projects today, so they include, for example, OneWeb, SES Mpower, Telesat, SpaceX's Starlink, and Kuiper. And I would say most of them have observed delays in recent years for different reasons, whether COVID delays, for example, or vendor selection. And SpaceX's Starlink is really the only one that has largely maintained its anticipated development timelines. And when you look at Amazon Kuiper, so they've invested more than $10 billion so far in their Kuiper project after receiving FCC approval last year. And what we expect is that all of those constellations should enter full service within the 2024 or maybe 25 timeframe. Starlink has launched the most satellites to date at more than 1,700, and they can be considered the leader more or less at the same level as OneWeb when factoring deployment progress. SES Empower is a bit behind, but they already have a few satellites in orbit, and I would say Telesat has launched its first prototype satellite a few months ago and signed the manufacturing contract with Thales earlier this year. And according to publicly available information, so Kuiper is really the least developed in terms of technical design and maturity today. So what to say here? So the universal broadband access market offers significant growth opportunities to the Satcom industry, as I mentioned before, as the Satcom industry has observed a decrease in revenues since 2014, so for the past 6-7 years. And during this period, the broadband market has been one of the few bright spots for satellite operators, with revenues increasing every year. So this has pushed current players to really increasingly target this market, I would say. And with the aforementioned constellations, there should be a big push by satellite in coming years to help reduce this digital divide. To conclude this last slide, so I think it is possible for satellite to help bridge the digital divide, or rather, would I believe it is possible to bridge the digital divide in the next 10 years? I would say that a lot will need to happen for this to be the case. So we believe it is unlikely that the digital divide would be bridged by satellite in the next 10 years, maybe more so in the longer term. I would say, what's really, well, the space part of the equation, which is progressively getting there with a massive amount of supply that will be added with these constellations and VHTS satellites in coming years. But I would say what's lagging behind for the market to develop faster is really today the ground part. So it's not there yet, even if progress has been made in the past few years. So I think we really need advances in user terminal technology and cost points as well, which is important for this to happen in coming years to fully really unlock this broadband opportunity. So apart from drops in the cost base of capacity, so that I mentioned before, other conditions to unlock the broadband opportunity in coming years will include the closer integration of satellite connectivity in the networks and distribution channels of terrestrial internet service providers, as well the adoption of new sales models, but also I would say the success of NGSO projects. So I mentioned earlier the timelines for NGSO projects. And I would say that launching the satellites is a first important step for sure, but this does not guarantee commercial success. And we believe that for satellite broadband to rapidly grow in coming years, the success of multiple NGSO constellations will be key. Last but not least, continued growth in government support through USO, so Universal Service Obligation funding, and initiatives will be essential too. One of the leading drivers of universal broadband access demand in recent years has been government funding and programs through USO initiatives, so aimed at bridging the digital divide between rural and urban areas. And accelerated government support is really key. It's important to stress it's a key remedy of broadband market failures in areas where it is difficult to close business cases. So for extending terrestrial networks, for example, on a purely commercial basis. So these, I think, are the top 5 conditions we see that need to be realized for this market to really expand in coming years. And so this concludes my presentation. So thank you all for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bush, for setting the stage for today's discussions. We have received 2 questions from Indonesia and chat, and we understand that one of the questions is actually could be discussed in the second panel, so we will leave it for the now. And then Mr. Bush, you have one question from Indonesia as well, but because we are behind the schedule, so we will continue our discussion to the panel. In the meantime, maybe you could prepare yourself to answer those in the question from Indonesia, if it's okay. Thank you. Thank you, Indonesia, for your questions. Now, I would like to welcome the Ms. Natalie Lika, a Scientific Affairs Officer from NOSA. as the moderator to deep dive those some of the points raised by presented by Mr. Bush with the distinguished panel of the speakers in the first panel. Natalie, over to you.
Thank you very much. So I'm very much aware that we are a little bit delayed, so we'll try to close the panel within about 20 minutes. So we already heard a lot about what the technology can provide. There was also a session 2 days ago with several satellite service providers. So today for you, we have another 3 satellite service providers that I will invite to explain very briefly in just 2-3 minutes what they provide, because you will see it's a wide range of technology. Some are based on geostationary satellites, some are based on constellations, and they have just different products. And then we will start a discussion. So I just want to briefly introduce the 3 panelists before I just give them the floor. So we'll have Mr. Michael Lubin from Viasat. He's the Vice President of Corporate Development, and he's been an executive in the telecommunication and semiconductors industry for 40 years. He's been Vice President of Corporate Development and Senior Advisor at Viasat since 2005. Where he's involved with mergers and acquisitions, strategic partnership, and emerging uses of broadband connectivity. And he also spoke recently publicly about whether connectivity should be a human right. So maybe, Mike, I give you the floor for a few minutes just to introduce yourself to your company. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends. Some 40 years ago, between Christmas and New Year's, a very good engineer and I sent a proposal into a company called Schlumberger that launched the Ku-band VSAT industry. I'm
sorry, it seems we have a bit of an audio issue.
And user terminals have decreased in cost since that time by at least 2 orders of magnitude as well. And the industry has migrated from Ku-band to Ka-band and other frequency bands so that we're all exploiting everything we can with respect to spectrum, orbits, altitudes, and aspirations. But with about half the world unconnected, how can satellite actually play a much more primary role in bridging the digital divide? As Euroconsult mentioned, satellite is only addressing about 6% of the issue. Is it possible that satellites could address something much greater than 10 or 20 or even 50% of the divide? We have found that one of the biggest obstacles to internet adoption, especially by satellite, is affordability. So let me just address the affordability issue. If we follow the ITU earnings rule, people could afford 2% of their earnings on connectivity. And if we look at the least developed countries, which actually comprise about 1 billion people, but they have a GDP per capita of, let's say, $1,000. The real question is, if we use the 2% rule, can we provide meaningful connectivity to those individuals at $1.66 per month? A relatively small number. Now, the word meaningful is a bit loaded. We have to ask ourselves, what does that mean? Is meaningful 5 gigabytes per month, 50 gigabytes per month, 100 gigabytes per month? Because all wireless technologies, whether 4G, 5G, GEO, NGSO, all have costs associated with delivered gigabytes. So we have to decide what meaningful is. Let me propose it's not 500 gigabytes to transform lives. And I'll give a couple of examples. We can do a telemedicine session between a lot of capacity to do telemedicine sessions, which can really transform lives. Precision agriculture requires 3 to 5 gigabytes per year, a very, very small number. And we all know that with respect to education, there are new technologies. We can cache lots of content locally and zero rate it. We can also multicast into countries or into regions of countries, saving lots of capacity. So I propose that while we're thinking about the right long-term solutions with respect to connecting everybody with hundreds of gigabytes per month, we can transform the lives of many with much smaller numbers of gigabytes. In parallel to the advances that GEOs have made, as was mentioned by Euroconsult, the NGSO and the LEO industry has made major advances also. But I think when we talk about LEOs being part of our future, they too have to meet certain criteria for success. One is, can they meet the affordability index that we just talked about before? Second is, can they trust that they will actually ensure space safety? And I'll come back to the space safety issue. And the third issue is, are they going to be able to not monopolize space and deny lots of countries and their industries access because they're actually tying up the best orbits, the best altitudes, and the best spectrum? So let me take a look at the overall digital divide issue. I actually disagree with Euroconsult. I think we need more than 7 terabits per second, and I'll explain that in a second. Let's assume that we wanted to give 5 gigabytes per month to the 1 billion people in least developed countries. That would require 25 terabits per second. Now, next year, Viasat, and I suspect other companies, will be launching terabit per second satellites. In fact, Viasat will launch 3 in the next 2 years that will cover the world with 3 terabits per second. That means that you need 25 of those satellites to give 5 gigabytes per month to 1 billion people. That doesn't sound really overwhelming as a task. The equivalent for a mega constellation is 12,500 smaller satellites. That to me sounds formidable. So I think we should not assume that the mega constellations will necessarily be the proper answer, because the GEOs also look like they can be quite successful. Several years in the future, we have designs already to launch 5,000 gigabit per second satellites. That means we can connect those 1 billion people with only 5 satellites.
Thank
so
you.
I think that can be done quite economically. So in conclusion, after 40 years, I'm an optimist that satellites, I think, can play a much more major role, be they GEOs or mega constellations of LEO. But I would urge all, ENUSA, the ITU, UN organizations, and those who grant landing rights, that we should not sacrifice space safety and relax standards for these mega constellations. And we should also ensure that these mega constellations do not deny access to the tens or hundreds of countries that have aspirations to be in space. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your views. So I will now move to our second speaker, Dr. Abimbola Lale. She's the Managing Director and the Chief Operation Officer of the Nigerian Communication Satellite Limited. And she has pursued an active career in the space sector for over 20 years. So I will just give you the floor to briefly present your views. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon or good morning, Your Excellency, co-panelists and other speakers. You rightly said, I work with NIGCOMSAT. NIGCOMSAT itself is about 15-year-old, and we manage a geostationary satellite and other investments of governments in satellite or communication satellite precisely for now. And like the views that have been presented by the previous speakers before me, the Excellency, Francesca, and Madam Simonetta De Popo, and other, satellite communication is actually it's been playing very complementary role to broadband connectivity. And what ITU is for, ITU is about providing the entire population of the world with broadband access. Like Mr. Lubin said, broadband should be considered as a human right. And indeed, it should be considered as a human right because everybody deserves to be connected because the world is now operating in a digital space. So on that note, Nigeria being, part of, we don't want to be left behind. So we keep forging and we keep trying to catch up with the pace, even though we're in the part of the developing country. But anything that could enhance the people's well-being, and broadband is considered one of those things that actually enhance the future of Nigerians, and of course, in extension, Africa. So for our own future plans, what we've been doing, our satellite that we're currently managing was launched in 2011. So we have, presently we're planning a new mission, and that mission is directed, it's going to be an HCS satellite, because we have to address the issue of cost, as stated by Mr. Dimitri. Cost is a great issue if we are to actually allow people to actually utilize or encourage everyone to be connected. And we have about 15% of African homes not yet connected. So, and I'm sure that is the statistics provided. It could actually be greater, but satellite communication or satellite itself is actually a very, very important factor right now. Hello? Hello? Satellite connectivity, satellite itself is a very integral part of any broadband infrastructure, as part, because we're talking of terrestrial, we're talking of cable, but we do know the rules of satellite. And because of that now, Nigeria designed a national broadband plan, a 5-year broadband plan from 2020 to 2025. And it was a lot of research work, and it's been identified in that research work that NIGCOMSAT will cover or provide over 3,000 VSATs in the next, before 2025, so that 10% of the areas we consider as black spots, which are underserved, rural, or very difficult to reach areas, will be provided with broadband. So we are we are working towards rolling those things, and it's actually very well coordinated, because it's a committee, it's a national committee, and so we need to ensure that 3,000 VSATs before 2025, additional other than the present one that is pockets of, but government will ensure that 3,000 VSATs are rolled out in rural areas. And also, in addition, part of the preparation to also make sure that Nigeria is part of the broadband or digital world is also that NIGCOMSAT has trained this year over 600 youths. We all know the role that broadband is playing presently in job and wealth creation, because without broadband, how do the people in the rural areas have access to what you're doing, and how do they connect to what is going on in the world? How would even the students, even health, education? So because of that, and because majority of our people still reside in the rural areas, over 60% of our people reside in the rural areas, the government through NIGCOMSAT has trained 600 youths this year, and we plan to do that for 5 years. And the reason why we're training youths on VSAT installation is because we need to develop a pool of people who have digital skills that could install this VSAT that we're going to roll out. Because if we don't train them, then it becomes very, by the time we need people to install these things in rural areas, that means the very few people who are actually having the knowledge right now at NIGCOMSAT would have to be overstretched, and the time to roll out will also be limited. I mean, we're going to run out of time. So in preparation for that rollout, in preparation for digital skills, in preparation for a digital world, so this year, 600, 2022 to 600 till 2025, 600 annually. And other than that, we started seeing results. When I mentioned job and wealth creation, we've seen results because some of the youths we trained this year already, they are beginning to use that skill to actually work and start making money. We've received testimony from some of them. They're doing well. They are already in our pool of, we have a pool of, database of these installers. So we recommend them to people, to some of our channel partners who are providing broadband services. We've supplied their names to those channel partners to use them regardless of where they are, because the 600 youths were taken across the 6 geopolitical zones of the country. Nigeria is big, and we have a population of very active youths. For 47, almost 50% of Nigerian population, they are youths right now. And employment rate last year was almost 14.2%. So we need to get them actually engaged. So that's one of the things NIGCOMSAT has been, other than providing its traditional services of broadband, of broadcasting services, of backhauling services. We take training and capacity building in this sector very, very seriously. And
indeed, sorry to interrupt, it's just indeed, that's very, very important, because it's not only about connectivity, but it's an entire ecosystem that has to be developed in the country to enable the deployment, to enable the maintenance, to provide training to others who are going to use these at stations. So thank you very much indeed, because you're really opening the topic to going beyond only just the connectivity.
Thank you. You're very correct. You got the point. So it's not just about providing the services, it's about developing the ecosystem, the value chain, because that is actually one of the problems we have. And so we decided we needed to start addressing that. So we are doing that. And also we've been able to use, because I've listened to some other sessions before our sessions, people talking of the AI and health, and NIGCOMSAT using its own broadband on-demand services. We were able to support the frontline health workers during the COVID-19 pandemic to be able to provide real-time information between the health workers and those on the field and the health agencies around Nigeria, and also the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19, real-time reporting of the incidents and preventive measures. We supported, we used the satellite. So satellite is very useful in so many ways. We can't overstretch it, even though, yes, it is expensive. And like Mr. Dimitri pointed out in his presentation, several things have to be done to bring down the cost, but we all have to do our bits and contribute to different things to bring down the cost of satellite so that it can actually bridge the digital divide and the space divide we're talking about. Everybody has to contribute. But NIGCOMSAT, even being a government agency, is trying to do what it could do to actually make sure that satellite is seen as a positive contributor to just not just national development, but African development. And that is what we've been doing in NIGCOMSAT. I will be able to talk more and when we continue. Thank you.
Yeah, we will have I hope we have still a few minutes for a discussion, but I would like to give the floor to our third panelist, to Mr. Chen Wencheng, who is Vice President of China Satellite Communication Corporation. He has a degree from the Beijing University of Post and Telecommunication, and his work focuses on communication satellite application and then industrial development. So Mr. Wencheng, please, you have the floor. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Chen Wensheng from China Satcom. China Satcom is a satellite operator headquartered in Beijing, China. We have a totally 14 in-orbit satellite, and we have actually a long history in the satellite communication industry, providing the satellite service to the broadcaster, to the telecom operators, and the government customers across the Asia Pacific regions. Hello, this is maybe move to the next slide, please. Yes, for the satellite, I think the marketing is quite dynamic. Globally, the main driver is from the government, from the telecom operators, and from the enterprise. In China, I think the satellite video broadcasting, the marketing is good. However, for the communications, since the ground network is so well developed, so the satellite communication, at the moment, our business is more shifted to the application like airborne and the maritime applications, and also some provide the connectivities for the disaster relief. maybe next one. I think it's for the airborne and the maritime applications. In China, there are already some service providers, but this the service is based on the regular satellite. I think in China Satcom we try to provide the better broadband service to the consumers on the airplane and the ships based on our HTS Ka-band satellite. It provides a better service. Also, we set up two companies and dedicated for this two important marketing. Other application is here for the communication is to provide a connectivity service for the disaster relief. And for this application, we not only provide the capacity, the bandwidth, also we set up a platform together with our satellite, provide the end-to-end service, one-stop service to the customers. I think it's for the outlook. We think the next one, please. For the opportunities, we think a lot of opportunities in this industry, and also a lot of challenge in the industry. And we have the confidence for the satellite. I think since it is still a very vital, important part of the communication industry for the next 10 years. Thank you. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So if I can maybe just briefly ask you one question. What do you think is the most important element to then be able to provide connectivity via satellite in the least developed countries? In your opinion, is it developing an ecosystem, as we heard just earlier from Nishcomsat? Is it maybe lowering the cost of the user terminal, as we heard from Euroconsult? Or do you see another factor to provide connectivity in the least developed countries?
For me, the question is for me?
Yes, the question is for you.
Oh yes, sorry. I think it's the cost effective. Is very, very important. That's the reason why the trend is the satellite industry. The trend is to go to the high throughput satellite. It's to reduce the cost and give the customer a better service. That's very important. And also, I think the timing is important. For example, the in-flight connectivity service. A lot of I think in China and the ATS, the ground terrestrial service provider also have their solutions. So the timing, is very important. If we deploy our service before the ground service provider, we can have advantage. So timing is very important. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So then maybe I'll just have one final question for Nishcomsat and for Viasat. So in your view, because you're working now both on the geostationary satellite technology, so what do you think would be possible in 5 years from the perspective of the users that is not possible today with your own respective geostationary bias services?
That's why I said in my presentation that we're working towards HTS, because it allows, the high throughput, sorry, because it allows multiple reuse. We're be able to cover more areas and better customer experience because of the frequency is going to use the frequency reuse technology. So we are following, the trend. So in order to give our customers better services, because especially to reduce cost, and that is where the world is going. You don't want to continue to give them a service that's that is not commensurate with what the competition is giving them. So
sure.
we are
And
prepared,
so we'll be back on
in the next 2 years. In the next 2 years, to be able to catch up with where our competitions are and give them better customer experience. So before 5 years, they will catch up. So in the next 2.5 years, we should be there.
Thank you very much. And if I could maybe give the floor to Michael Lubin to just conclude and just let us know, in your opinion, what do you see coming up in 5 years?
Thank you. Well, our company is involved both with LEOs and GEOs, but if affordability is going to become the critical element, right now it looks as if the future GEOs will have an affordability advantage over the GEOs. The GEOs will have an advantage perhaps in the reverse link speed, may have an advantage in latency, but not in affordability for the near term. Over the next 3 years, we'll cover the world with 3,000 gigabit per second satellites that I think will allow us to learn significant amounts about what's going to be required in the future for getting 1 billion people online by satellite. And shortly thereafter, we will start launching 5,000 gigabit per second satellites, which I think will start meeting the affordability criteria for everyone. So I'm very optimistic about that. As I said, the only alarm I have is that when others and we start launching thousands or tens of thousands of small satellites, that we pay particular attention to space safety so that we do not impair space for future generations.
Well noted. Thank you very much. Now I'm aware of the time. I think we're already 20 minutes late. We were out to the initial schedule. So I will immediately pass the floor to the second panel.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Ricard, and the distinguished panelists for the discussion in panel 1. Now, now we move to the panel 2, and my pleasure to invite Mr. Jorge Chicorosi, the senior engineer in the Space Station Coordination Team in ITU, to moderate the second panel discussion. Jorge, over to you.
Thank you very much, Yungi, and also to Natalie for catching up a bit with the time. So yes, I'm pleased to moderate this second panel and to count with 3 experts from the regulatory, the industry, and also the space agency sectors. And since we have the opportunity to be the last, in a way, panel of this event, it's also a good opportunity to make a kind of wrap up and link all the elements we have been listening. And this is probably one of our objectives. I will now share just a few slides with you to try to share what is the objective of our panel, and you may let me know if you are seeing it well. Can you see it?
Yes, we can see.
Perfect. So
maybe you want to make a slide mode?
Yes, now?
Yes, good.
Okay. So before that, let's have a look and see a little bit some facts and figures on space services. No, so we are in 2021, but as you know, everything started since 1957 with the first Sputnik 1 from Soviet Union launched. It was an NGSO satellite. But then in the early 60s, we already have the first Telstar 1 from USA doing intercontinental transmissions. And until now, with HTS, high throughput satellites in the GSO orbit, providing a significant amount of information or capacity, and also the emerging CubeSats with different applications like IoT, etc., but also in a big amount of satellites. On top of that, we are having the NGSO large constellation for broadband applications that we will see also during this panel from one of the operators. And why not? We also know that there are multi-country projects going to the moon and beyond, in fact, to provide some radio communication services. So what I'm trying to see, and we see in this exponential curve, is that not only the objects which were launched, of course, but also the amount of satellites which are orbiting have been increasing. And we have been with space regulation since 1963 in the first administrative conference held here in Geneva for allocating space services frequency bands for space services. So we have more than 50 years, in fact, almost 60 years of space regulation. So these member states were kind of visionary to say, okay, we need to coordinate, we need to plan this in advance. And thanks to that, we are in the situation today where we can have this connectivity. So 68 member states have access to the space resources in terms of satellites. Of course, almost all of them have at least one Earth station. There are 1,700 satellite networks recorded and operated at the ITU, which counts for a total of 4 terahertz of global spectrum coordinated and recorded with very low index of interference, and very stable. This represents a space economy of 400 billion to date, according to some sources, or 1.1 trillion forecasted by 2040. So we will see now why I made this introduction, because we know that, and it was expressed also during the previous speakers and panels, that 4.1 billion of people are connected to internet, 53% of the population, but 3.7 billion are not yet connected. It's almost 50%. No? And as we said, we know that the technology available today counts with satellite fleet with global coverage. No? At the beginning, there were very few GSO, but today we count with many competitors providing global coverage. And we also have the emerging NGSOLAR constellations. And of course, we have the traditional terrestrial system, from 3G, 4G, 5G in some cities, IMT, and Wi-Fi spots, plus the fixed services and why not fiber optic. So having done this introduction, the objective of this panel, and maybe just at the end of the session as well, is to answer this. We'll try to present and discuss from the 3 different views why we are in this situation and what else can we do as space stakeholders to connect and connect it. And certainly we don't have much time, and this is in fact a good opportunity to say, okay, let's go straight to the point. What do we need? What can be done in terms of spectrum availability, new technologies, licensing? There was already a question from Indonesia about landing rights, policies, regulations, incentives, maybe investment also from the private or public sector, and affordability, very important, also addressed by the representative of Viasat. So having said this, I would like to stop to share this and give the floor to the first panelist, who is, I just have an issue here, who is Eric May Hayes from the European Union, who is a frequency manager expert, and he will share with us the views from this organization. Please, Dominic.
Thank you, Jose. So my name is Dominic Hayes. I'm from the European Commission, which is the executive body of the European Union, the collection of 27 member states in Europe. So back in the beginning of last year, our new commissioner, Commissioner Breton, surveyed the internal market because he's responsible for the internal market. He saw that we had Galileo, he saw that we had Copernicus, our Earth observation system, and he recognized that there was a gap in Europe's capabilities. So he proposed a third major space project, this secure space-based connectivity system. Its aim is to ensure that Europe continues its strategic autonomy, that it can be resilient and have technological sovereignty. It also enables Europe to strengthen its place within the world, to be a global leader, but also to strengthen the place of industry. Europe has, I think, the second space economy in terms of its industrial capacity. So this is another way to enable Europe's space capacity to grow and develop to support a third major project in Europe funded by the European Union. So it will be a multi-orbital architecture based on existing EU capabilities in the geostationary arc, but it will add a LEO and potentially a MEO component. It will serve primarily governmental, but also commercial applications. There is a gap at the moment in terms of what can be provided for secure governmental applications, and that's obviously a key driver for what we're doing, but we will also have commercial capacity within our system. Initially, the aim will be to cover Europe and Africa, because with GEO components, Africa's in an ideal location. In fact, many of the developing countries are actually on the equatorial plane, and therefore they are well served, or could be well served, by geostationary technologies. Ultimately, our system will be a global system. So once we've added the LEO and MEO components, potentially we'll be able to cover the Earth globally, including the polar regions. As I mentioned, security will be a key part, a key component of the system. So it will be designed in and not an add-on. We will be using quantum technologies in our system eventually, not initially, but eventually, and that will ensure the most reliable and secure components for our connected users. So we're hoping that this will help ease connectivity gaps. So even though it will be focused on European markets and users, our system will offer spare capacity on a global basis to developing countries as well as developed countries. It will add to a growing list of space assets that will serve internet access markets. We're not the only system, we recognize that. In fact, we're not even on the list that Dimitri had there, 5 players. We haven't even started, but we hope to catch up quickly. GEO, as I said, is already available, and we see it as a proven and cost-effective solution for internet access for many markets. LEO and MEO will have this low latency and capacity enhancements, but in fact, not all applications will need this low latency. So we see a significant portion of internet access can be provided through existing GEO assets and new GEO assets. Receiver cost, I think, is going to be really critical. There currently is a huge gap between the cost of LEO and MEO components, ground components and user terminals, with that's already available for GEO capacity. That gap will close gradually as we have more of these mega constellations in the market with more terminals available. There's a very good question by Eddie of Indonesia, who said, what can we do to enable better solutions for users? I see standardization as being key. If you look back at what happened with GSM and the terrestrial connectivity, really the standardization of GSM really kick-started the market for terrestrial communications. It really exploded after that. You have a handset now, you buy a handset from almost anywhere in the world, you put a SIM in locally and you can use that handset. That's the kind of thing we need for satellite capacity, to enable you to go out, buy a cheap terminal, a cheap antenna, and connect it with a local connectivity SIM or equivalent, and you're connected. That's what I see as being enabling developing markets, developing countries to access the technology that we have now in the developed countries. And regulators can play a real key role in this by easing the requirements for landing rights, for the satellite signal landing rights. So the licensing is going to be crucial for providing access within your countries, within developing countries and developed countries. So whatever regulators can do to ease that process, that will be a big help. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dominic Higgs. It was really clear, and we understand that in the EU, you are really providing a very good say investment in terms of a group of countries that you have the view, and it's quite a good view in the sense that the solution, there is no one solution, but there are different solutions depending on the needs and the application as well, no, in terms of connectivity. Yeah. So we are writing down different views and different proposals. You also mentioned standardization and landing rights. And thank you. And we'll go to the next speaker, who is Mrs. Laura Roberti, current Director of Licensing and Market Access from Telesat Canada. And as you know, Canada and Telesat Canada has also a good interesting history in terms of investment in satellite connectivity, well, because of different things. She may explain better than me, but because of the geographical situation, because of the large country, and started with GSO, but now she will present us a very nice constellation of NGSO satellites. Laura?
Can you hear me?
Yes, just if you could turn to slide mode, that would be perfect. Presentation.
Is that all right?
Yes, excellent.
Okay. Hello everybody, all the distinguished participants and panelists. I'm most pleased to have this opportunity today, and my gratitude goes to the organizers. So I just have 3 slides on the opportunity of being able to provide city quality internet everywhere by leveraging the satellite systems, and in particular leverage the new emerging technologies concerning non-geostationary satellites and LEO in particular. As far as the connectivity gap is concerned, there is no need to repeat that, of course, it exists. I would like to emphasize that connectivity gap does not necessarily mean complete lack of connectivity, but it also means that connectivity that is not simply good enough for today's requirement. And I would say that, again, the recent COVID crisis has emphasized this aspect even more. There are, of course, solutions with terrestrial networks, including optical fiber, geostationary satellites. However, this new non-GSO emerging technology really has the opportunity of optimizing the delivery of connectivity in terms of quality and cost effectiveness. And this with unprecedented high speed, high capacity, low latency, and truly global and reliable coverage. Telesat in this respect is developing Telesat Lightspeed, which is a highly innovative system at the cutting edge of this new technology. This slide is about light speed, but I'm using it in a more general context to show what can be the characteristics of these new emerging systems that also make them, differentiate them from existing ones. So coverage, first of all, Telesat Lightspeed has 2 different types of orbit. A polar orbit that allows true global coverage, including the poles, of course, and an inclined orbit, which allows to focus capacity where more demand is expected, which is in the medium latitude ranges. In terms of frequencies, Ka band is used, which means potentially up to around 4 gigahertz of spectrum, which in turn, together with other characteristics, allows once again for unprecedented amount of capacity. In fact, for this system, but I'm sure for others as well, we can have user links to up to multiple gigabits per second to a single user. Other characteristics involve, for instance, the possibility of using optical intersatellite links, and these have the benefits of optimizing the network, also in terms of reducing the number of satellites. In fact, the Telesat Lightspeed also only have 298, at least to start with. Other characteristics that are entirely new are very fast hopping beams, so that a single beam can cover different areas at the same time in a way that is totally transparent to the users. And there are other things, but the point is all this new technology for what at the end? So the purpose is really to provide a resilient, always on, quick and economic connectivity to rural, remote areas and also on the move. So in other words, truly global fiber-like connectivity. So the question was, what can be done in order to make this, to facilitate also the deployment of these systems? Well, I'm a regulatory person, so I speak more from a regulatory and policy standpoint. And there are certainly a number of things that would facilitate the deployment. So first of all, the governmental support schemes towards universal connectivity can be a key driver, of course, and these should also include the satellite option. And this is more in general. I think government really need to have this vision of terrestrial and satellite networks not as being competing technology, but it's really necessary to emphasize the synergy between these two technologies in order to fully exploit the benefits that can derive from them. None of them can alone solve the connectivity gap. Both of them are needed, and policy and regulations should take this aspect into account. I believe this is fundamental. Other presenters have already mentioned the requirement to streamline the licensing process so that there are no artificial barriers to entry. One thing that we emphasize with many regulators is that individual user terminal by user terminal licenses are, if I'm at liberty to say, almost a thing of the past, in the sense that these new systems can have hundreds, thousands of small terminal, small portable VSATs, Earth Station in Motions, and these are the deployment of which is much facilitated by what is called the blanket license. Another aspect is the cost of spectrum. I mentioned that, for instance, high throughput satellites in Ka band, including light speed, can use up to 4 gigahertz. So wherever there are spectrum formula that are bandwidth related, it is essential that these are now assessed in relation to these new spectrum requirements, because they were often developed where only a few megahertz of spectrum were required. These new systems bring the aspect of mobility of these user terminals, for instance, for overflight of aircraft with user terminals licensed in different countries. So it is extremely important, in order not to create artificial gaps in the coverage, that these user terminals are free to circulate, of course, on a non-interference, non-protection basis, on the basis of the license that were assigned in the country of registration. Not only cost of spectrum is important, but also availability of spectrum. In particular, I just mentioned the contended 28 gigahertz band that we as Telesat, but many other satellite operators, consider as absolutely essential for the development of these novel revolutionary systems, if I may say. In general, it is of the utmost importance that regulations do not artificially delay deployment of new technology. And this is also in relation to WRC 23 agenda items. There are some, at least for instance, agenda item 116 will be key to develop an harmonized framework in relation also to the non-geostationary system. So of course, we advocate that with administration, that support is given to the studies. And just to conclude, one last aspect that I would like to mention is the aspect of, before the standardization has been mentioned, I would extend it to harmonization, in the sense that it is very important that also in terms of landing rights and licenses and type approval, a level of harmonization, at least at regional level, if not global, is achieved. Otherwise, every time you cross a border, and every satellite system is by definition international, cover more than one country, you have every time to reinvent the wheel. So I would emphasize once again the importance of harmonization when it comes to satellite regulations. And with this, I would thank you all very much, and I will conclude my presentation. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much, Laura. It was a really complete presentation. I think you show us what the technology can bring us. So very innovative technologies from in this case, from the Telesat project, no, with optic links and so on. So certainly technology is one of the solutions. Maybe it's not the problem now in the terms of connectivity, but can bring us solutions. You mentioned many things, from harmonization, landing rights as well, governmental support, and certainly spectrum. And for that, because I am from the VR, I cannot keep quiet. Certainly, spectrum is a key. And in the case of the WRC, you were mentioning mobility. It's important to emphasize that mobility is not only, in fact, for those who are moving, because mobility fits a role to provide connectivity in some areas which are not sometimes normally not covered by other systems. So it's not only for moving, let's say. So thank you. And continuing with the also with the support from governments, I think it's a good moment to give to an expert from Rwanda from which years ago they have the project to launch a space agency, and he can give us more details on that and his view. So for that, let me give the floor to Mr. George Visera, who is the CTO, Chief Technical Officer of the Rwanda Space Agency.
Thank you so much, Jorge, for the kind introduction. Maybe you can just go straight to the second slide because we don't have enough time, which again, I would really say it briefly because it has been highlighted from Dimitri at the beginning, and whoever came after him, they are emphasizing on something that is very important. We have the satellite resources, we have the users who desperately need connectivity, but these users are not taking advantage of available satellite services. There is a problem. If you can go to the next slide, maybe to see some of the issues that might happen. So I wanted to bring this map of different players or stakeholders in this to maybe see where the question, where the issue can be. We have the users, we have the regulators or government, including maybe even sometimes Rwanda space agencies and so on, and we have operators. So what happens that, at least from my experience, is satellite operators sometimes, again, I'm talking in the context of sub-Saharan Africa. This is from my experience of more than 10 years I've spent with the regulatory authority. Satellite operators sometimes never talk to consumers. Actually, they don't know exactly their needs. They usually go via what we call internet service providers, and they just ensure that they get licensed and start providing the services from London, New York, and any other city I don't want to mention in this. So there's a problem. So we have people serving, we have operators serving the people that they did not really understand the needs. That's first problem number one. Problem number two comes now. The government or regulators or whoever is in between, who is supposed to link the two. They also, you can see on the presentation, I put a big question mark. So people think that they do discuss, but really the discussion is very limited. At least from my experience, you see consumers talking to regulators, and really usually what happens is that regulators will assume that they know what consumers need. But most of the time, I can assure you, they do not know. Then what happens? What happens is that the discussion will be between the regulators or the government and satellite operators. So what do they discuss is they're going to discuss on behalf of the consumers that I don't not understand fully with the satellite operators who do not really fully understand the needs of these consumers. So we have people who need services, but in the discussions, they are completely excluded. Okay, partially excluded. Then I'll just give you a typical scenario. What happens is that a satellite operator will come to seek spectrum, license, and so on. He's going to talk to the regulator who has sometimes in the context of sub-Saharan Africa have limited knowledge on how satellite technology works. One's license, the other one does not understand fully. And he's trying to serve people that he does not understand fully. Guess what happens? What happens is that the regulator will say, okay, since I don't understand well, maybe give me this paper. You submit a business plan to tomorrow, submit this document, tomorrow. So he'll keep asking documents, maybe hoping that we get to understand what is happening along the way. But usually he's forgetting that these services that satellite operators is bringing are supposed to come to the end user who needs connectivity desperately. So that's where come the problem that my friend Rora was describing of licensing regime, which is not adequate, charging of a spectrum, which is not reasonable, and other issues. So what should happen is, first of all, for the government to understand that at the end of the day, the person who needs the services are the consumers. They need to put them at the first. They need to do whatever is needed to facilitate them to get the required services. And trust me, the time that fiber came with saying that fiber is going to solve all the problems, we are here today in 2021, it never happened. We're talking about mobile can cover everywhere. I'm here today, I can guarantee you that we still have a long way to have full coverage of mobile. We definitely need satellite. And again, we need the satellite in these critical areas and rural areas where we do not want to go and deploy so many complex infrastructure, where you have an antenna and a battery and connect someone. So if then what now, what the satellite operator need to do is get close to the regulator and the consumers and understand their needs. Sometimes it's a lack of understanding, it is a miscommunication, it's very small things that can go and address and come up with a licensing regime that is adequate and that can facilitate transmitting the services to the people who need it. The issue of spectrum, trust me, if they see a need and understand that these services need to go to the consumers, you can negotiate the spectrum fees lower. You can negotiate actually anything when you show that you have you're bringing a value. So I wanted to put all these players together to really have a kind of a discussion on that. But again, we see here for the discussion through you, Mr. Jorge. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks to you. I think you were very clear. And if I could pick up one of the main messages you were saying is that listen to the end user or the consumer, I think, if I understood well. So thanks again. And well, we are really running much beyond the time we started later, but we cannot close certainly without the views of the experts that are listening to us. So we have prepared a very, very short poll that Luisa is preparing to launch it now, just to know also your views. We have listened the views of experts from the regulatory, from the industry, from the space agencies, from different needs. And we would like to know also, in a very quick poll, Luisa, if you could launch it now, please.
Yes.
To know, in your views, the audience, what is the main constraint and to prevent this 49 or 47, depending on the source, almost 50% of population to have access to the internet. Just one click, please. Just do it while we will continue with one more question, which I would like at least to address to the panelists, because, well, they have really dedicated a lot of time for this and they have done very good presentations, but maybe just a very, very quick discussion. In the same way, maybe you have mentioned the importance of the investment, the standardization, the landing rights, the licensing, the spectrum, and well, certainly also to listen the clients or the consumers, sometimes not just consumers, but people who are in need of the communication. So if I may ask to you, the three, just with one word, because we don't have much time, if you can choose one, only one of these, which one is the one that you would leverage or empower to provide more connectivity, I would say? I know that's difficult, it's a combination, it depends on each place, but in your view, which one would be that you would be starting with? Spectrum, technology, investment, regulations, licensing, the one that you face more troubles, let's say. If I may use the same sequence, starting from the representative of EU.
Okay, for me,
I know that the question is hard, sorry. It's not
Yeah,
a journalist question, but it's hard. But just one, pick up one. And
I think for me, the overriding difficulty for connectivity is the cost of equipment. Providing the equipment in a cost-effective way for the end user. I liken it to comparing cars. If you look at a Ferrari and you look at a Land Rover, in some places you can use a Ferrari because you have the infrastructure, you have the connectivity on the roads. In other places where you cannot access so easily, you could use a Land Rover. So these LEO constellations I see as being the sexy solution. It's not for everyone. I think for the developing countries, I think you need the Land Rover approach. Certainly at first, not ultimately, but at first, the Land Rover approach.
Thank you very much. Laura, I think you have already given a good opening for you, but you can have different views as well.
Oh, thank you, Jorge. From a regulatory standpoint, I see the unnecessary complexity and lack of clarity in the licensing process. But I fully agree that affordability is a key aspect. However, I respectfully disagree that LEO may not be the Land Rover in all countries. Once again, the amount of capacity that they will be able to provide, one of the scope is also to drive cost down. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, but not least, of course, he already mentioned, but you can also, George, mention again, or different view, what is the main aspect that you would like to improve?
Affordability, absolutely. And
only one.
Yeah. So
okay.
I'll go just for affordability. We'll develop later when we have a serious discussion with Rora.
Understood, totally.
Yeah.
So, okay, thank you. And let's go and see our audience. So, Luisa, if you can share the results to see what is the main topic that they also were thinking to improve. Can you see it? So we see that 5% of the audience was thinking about the spectrum. 18% of the audience was thinking about limitations in technology. So clearly technology provides more solution, but it's not a problem, as I was saying before. Lack of investment from the private sector is 8%. They are asking for more incentive or investment from the state, as it was also presented. Licensing restrictions, 13%, and a big important number, 30%, the highest one in terms of users affordability, that it was mentioned by you all. So I don't know if we can conclude something else. I think this is showing everything in my view. To conclude our panel, I really thank you all because I think it was a short. I'm sorry we extend more, but very clear. Maybe if Natalie wants to add something else, or Jung-hee would like to close the session.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jorge, and very distinguished panelists for the discussion panel 2 and also panel 1. And I also like to thank the questions raised by Spain and Indonesia and also Nigeria. I understand that some of those questions actually already answered by the survey poll and also during the discussion. So now it's already 5:50 in Geneva time, and then we have like 20 minutes over time. And then I really thank you so much for everyone to staying with us till end. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished the participants. Now, this brings us to the close today's very important discussion and opportunities of the satellite connectivity On behalf of the organizers, the UN Tech Envoys Office, and UNOSA and ITU, I would like to thank our distinguished speakers and all participants for joining us today. And apology again for a bit of a delay we had earlier today at the beginning of the meeting. And we actually very much invite you to visit our dedicated website for the emerging technology for connectivity, especially for developing countries, as well as the UN Secretary General's roadmap for digital corporations in the website of the UN Tech Envoys Office, www.un.org/techenvoy. So this actually is the end of this meeting, and you will be able to see the recording of today's meeting and the website of the Emerging Technology for Connectivity. So thank you so much again. I wish you all have a nice rest of the day and weekend, and also good summer. Thank you so much. Close.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you again.
Bye. Thanks for all of you.
Bye.
Thank you so
Bye,
much.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.